Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Range Resources and Mark, the committee, for inviting me. I gave a presentation here. You may see a little commonality between some of the information today and what I did. I think it was the first EnerGIS conference that we had here, and I always appreciate being invited back. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the refining the as-built process. Like I said earlier, I did a presentation on, it's one thing to build facilities, but how do you get that information, that data that's been built, how do you get that back into the office so that all of a sudden it's being used? That in your engineering or your pipeline integrity or the various groups, whoever it is that needs that data, how do you get it back in? Well, we were really tasked with trying to collect all of that information. There's a lot of construction, for our company, there's a lot of construction been in the transmission side of things. New facilities being put in, new pipelines, lots of projects that are being planned. This is kind of our footprint, or if you will, this is kind of what we are. I say that with a caveat that it was just announced not too long ago that Columbia Pipeline Group was purchased by TransCanada, so we're going to have to add A on the end of everything else we say. And but TransCanada is actually a company, if you look at their footprint, our footprint fits very nicely with where they were not. So predominantly on the eastern side of things. We right now, Columbia Pipeline Group comes from Louisiana all the way up to New York, and we cover a lot of area, 15,000 plus miles of pipeline, transmission pipeline company. And our group is tasked also with maintaining the GIS data on all of that, as well as all of the work management, the Maximo side of things. That falls under the technical data and design. And we do support a lot of various departments in our group. But like I said, one of the things that was a challenge for us is we developed, or we had worked in conjunction with the company to develop a tool called Project Packager, which basically was a repository where project teams, as they gather the data, it gave them a place to put all of that construction data. It gave them a place to put all the documentation. No matter what they say, I remember, and I laugh still to this day, because they said, there's coming a time when there'll be a paperless office. I don't ever see a time when there's going to be a paperless office, because it seems like the more work we do, the more regulators get involved, the more paper, the more reports, the more data that gets generated. For the transmission side of things, we're looking at things, it wasn't just the IMP rule, we're looking at a mega rule now coming out where they really want to know everything, and the need for data is becoming more and more, especially because one thing is the regulators found out they can ask for it and you have to give it to them. So again, being responsible operators, we have to provide that type of information to them at all times. Again, the big challenge was we took on a modernization program where we're going to upgrade facilities, upgrade pipelines, get rid of a lot of wrought iron pipelines or bare pipelines, bare steel in the ground. Again, if we're going to support the movement of lots of transmission gas and things like that, we've got to have a reliable system. We also have to be safe. So taking on, we had put together a plan that is really, we call it our modernization plan. Right now they're looking at it through the year 2020, possibly 2021, where they've got these projects already out that we're going to do. Each one of these modernization projects, usually within a year, again, you see that note there about being a corporate directive that you will have that. If that goes in service, then they want a certain amount of time. It's a shortened amount of time between the time it goes in service to the time you're able to see that data. So again, looking at it, it wasn't just enough for us to design another tool to house that information. We actually had to go back and look at how we were actually, the whole process. So that's really what we did. It required more than just a change of a tool. We stepped back. This ended up being a week-long effort that started it. We got basically we took all of the parties that were involved. You have operations, you have the capital project teams, we had GIS representation, we had work management representation, finance, environmental, FERC certificates, all of these type of departments. It's interesting that everyone was doing their various jobs, but nobody was herding the cats. I call it herding the cats, because everybody was doing a lot of work, but who was coordinating this? How were we getting data? Like I said, with our modernization program, we've got a lot of project managers. They've expanded that role. They've expanded the number of them, the project teams. And so what we've had to do, again, was go back and think about, what does our process look like? Once we get down the process of gathering all this as-built information, working with engineering companies and so forth to make sure that we're getting that, then we develop a tool or adapt the tool that we had to collect all of that information. Really, that's what my primary responsibility is making sure that we've got all of that type of documentation that allows us to effectively close the gap between when a pipeline goes in service or a facility goes in service to the time that we can display it in work management, or we can display it in GIS and so forth. One of the things that we've done is I've got just a quick slide here to utilize technologies that we can really speed up the collection of information. What we were finding is we looked at, we literally did, it was one whole wall of flow charts of things that we would take operations, for instance, and say, so when a project goes in service, what do you do? And they would map out this flow, and we would see how that played out. We would look at when work management needed their information. When does that happen, and how does that tie to you, and so forth. So we were trying to connect all of the dots, and when we did that, that's when it became apparent that this whole process needs to be overhauled. And again, that's why we took that in. Just to give you a quick example, for instance, we found out through the course of that as-built overhaul, I call it, that Maximo, for instance, they weren't receiving their data in a very timely manner, for instance. I'll give you an example of that. They had a facility that went in service on this date. 6 months later, they're asking questions. They said, I heard there's a project about, I heard there's a project out here, and where's our data? So, well, we're already, these team leaders were emailing in and calling in saying, we're getting dinged, we're getting hit with these delinquent work orders because it's facilities that I don't have, and I'm sending guys out to maintain valves that are no longer there. So why is that? So again, it came back, that whole wall exercise that we did really showed that if we coordinate that to where the work management team could get the scope, we found out that if the documents could be gathered, such as the scope and the IFC drawings, that literally the work management could start building those assets ahead of time. The project didn't have to be through, didn't have to be complete or in service yet. They could take that scope, they could take that IFC drawings and start building assets and start developing preventive maintenance schedules and so forth on that. When the red lines came in, when documentation came in to support what was actually built, then it was a matter of just QCing this data. They could QC it and say, oh, okay, we got to change this. This is what was actually put in. So it actually allowed them to get started and to actually proceed a lot faster than what they were doing. Because the tool we had before, it would allow you to capture this data. We could put it in, but it really had just a, if you will, a GIS track, because we designed it. That's what we bid it for. So, it was really our interest. Everybody else would have to wait until we got through with it, and then we'd hand it off, and then somebody else could take and do something with it. Well, again, that's what came back and said, well, you're really not helping me any. Your new tool's not helping me. So again, it really come back to implementing the right tool, but even before that is implementing and defining the right process. So how do all of these people play together? I was using the illustration before, and I've used this before. Everybody, you run a 440 relay, for instance. Everybody can run their heart out, but when it comes down to it, the key to everything is how do you hand off the baton to the next runner? How do you hand it off? If you don't do that successfully, you cost time, you cost effort, it could cost you a lot. So again, that was why we looked at the overhaul process, looking at the documentation that we're getting, what it was, what we need to see, the data we needed to see, and so forth. And that's really why we were able to track a process all the way through from beginning to end. One of the things we developed is, like I said, the previous tool that we were using as far as building had to do more with a singular focus. There was a single workflow. What came out of that is all of the items that you see here, all of these represent workflows now that are in our process. And you'll notice throughout each one of them, not one of them is dependent on the other one to get to the complete state. And the reason why we did that is we found out that previously work management would have to wait until GIS was done before we would hand off and say, this is what we built, now you can put those assets in. Well, that was throwing them behind the 8 ball, if you will, and not being able to start their process. So again, we looked at it in this way, is what allowed us to start all of these processes on their own so that everybody could start working at the same time. Again, I just reiterate, it had to do more with making sure that when it went in service, that was the critical date, was when something went in service, that's when it started, we're going to look to being audited and so forth. Go the other way here. This kind of gives you a screenshot of what the new tool is, or what we did to redesign that. It gives us a detailed list of the projects, specific items involved in that. You'll notice here in this column that's highlighted, this tells us really what workflow we're in and what workflows are involved. Not every project is going to have FERC, environmental, and all of these other, it may not have every workflow involved in it. But if you want to get a quick view of what workflows are involved in that particular project, and the reason why we're interested in that is because we can actually be able to run reports. So if I'm looking at a project and where it is in its flow, I can see that work management is done with theirs, or that fixed asset accounting is done, or that there's still work to be done in the GIS side of things. That becomes important, especially when you start looking at, when management starts looking at, well, why do we not see that? Why do we not see those facilities out there? And we've had that more recently as well. I know some of the ones here have been working on some of the projects, and what management has done is they've found out that we're speeding up and we're trying to refine this process, and so now they know when a project is constructed, I want to see the data about that. I want to see it now. And so again, being able to report and say this is exactly where this project is in its life cycle. We know where it is at all times. This represents, I just kind of got a screenshot, I know you can't read everything. This ended up being a full comprehensive document groups is what we call them. We broke it out this way because it allows the project team to know if they're going to put documents in, then they know exactly where they go. Why is that important? Because you'll notice this, you've got different document groups. Each document group can be marked complete, and why that's important is because, you're able to see a detailed view of here, and I know I don't have a whole lot of time to go into that, but here's another view of the various workflows. This tells us what workflow is enrolled in this particular project. And down there you can look at this. That workflow is in this status. So again, being able to generate reports off of that. What challenge we've had at this time is we developed that tool, and so from 2016 projects on, this goes sweet. But we downloaded and exported all of the historic data that wasn't complete, that was in one format, and we tried to push it into this format. And now we've got things out there that I'm cleaning up, trying to clean up, and it says, I don't have any clue where I'm supposed to be. You've got all these 56 groups out here, and before you only had 32, so where do I go? So that's been an interesting challenge, to say the least. But it does help us, again, keep a pulse on all the documentation, and we've been able to work with the project teams and help them to load the various things. This gives us, again, just a kind of a management view, if you will, a detailed overview of that. Again, documents being able to be loaded is a lot easier. And so that's one of the things that we've got there. It allows you to grab a group of documents and drop them in, and it'll load them. The project support analysts love that because that is actually helps them out a lot. This just kind of gives you an idea of the document, the link. You're able to add notes, tags, that if you want to search for a given document, you can find that document and you can see it's there. Again, that's an older slide. There was one, I'm sorry, I'm going to back up here a minute and see if I can, I don't have it. The one reason why this is important here is because what we did was we built intelligence behind each one of these document groups so that when a document group goes complete, it knows what workflow it's associated with. So one workflow, one document group could be attached to GIS, Maximo, design, panel maps, whatever that is. You could have multiple workflows attached to one. The minute a document group goes complete, there's an email that goes out that says to somebody in that group, it says, you've got something here to use now. You've got something that you can work on. So again, just kind of a quick overview that for us as Columbia, being able to take the data. I was telling someone earlier that we've actually developed in-house as well a way to take survey data and take all of the data, the as-built data that's been gathered. We don't really have to go through and process it now. We can actually load it into GIS. We can actually take it, load it into this app. So again, the focus is being able to really look at the process, what really is needed, and then working a lot with the project teams to make sure that we really get the data as built properly, but more than that, getting it done quickly so that we can keep ourselves out of hot water. We can get through the audits, we can get through this, but again, it really helps to be able to help the organization to see this is what we built, and everything, we've got everything documented so that if there is an audit, it's we live by the adage that it's traceable, verifiable, and complete. So again, that's just, I appreciate your time. It's just a real quick overview of our process. There's so much more that we could obviously talk about. Talking's not my problem, shutting up is, so I'm going to shut up and now entertain any questions if you have them.